With the fundamental principles now under our belt and the basic geometry drawn of our floor plan section elevations, let's focus on viewports, paper space, and drawing layouts. So within CAD, you have paper space as alluded to a few classes ago, and that's accessible through the tabs in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm in the model space currently, and that again, that's signified by the blue dark screen. And then I've got a cover sheet, and I have another sheet called Plans, Elevations, and Sections. So on these sheets, you'll notice a few things. One, that you are actually seeing a sheet with a title block, which is a block within itself, and that title block has all of the information that would typically be on a working drawing set. This is just the bulk standard A3 title block that comes out with CAD, and we can edit that. And the other thing to notice is that you have these windows that are called viewports. So essentially they are, as the name implies, almost like a window into the model space. And they allow us to have very accurate control over what we're seeing and at what scale on a given sheet. So the cover sheet I'm going to leave as for now, but we're going to use our other sheets as a reference. So I'm going to bring up the reference set of drawings, and what you will find is that they are invisible when they're printed, but essentially there is a viewport that is taking up the window for elevations, and then there's another one for the section, and there's one for the floor plan. So in this case, there's 3 viewports on this sheet. And the thing is you can change them to be different scales depending on what you prefer. So in this case, the viewport for the plan and section is a scale of 1 to 150, but the elevations are at a scale of 1 to 100. Hence why you'll notice that, like, this drawing here is literally half the size of this drawing here. A bigger scale, half the size. And then you'll notice on the details, you have another 3 viewports. So you have one up here, one here, and another one down here. Again, at different scales. So this one is at 1 to 10, this one over here is at 1 to 10, and this one, which is the roof details, at 1 to 5. So again, double the size of this viewport here. The cover sheet only has one viewport. If you could imagine, there is a box, an invisible box that's doing something like this, and that simply just has text in it for our generic notes. So let's go through the process of creating a sheet or copying a sheet. So we have 2 more sheets to create. We've got the cover sheet that's in the file. We have the floor plans section elevation that's in the file. We need a sheet for our details, and we need a sheet for our window and door schedules. So inside of CAD, I am going to go to my sheets, and I'm going to right click on one of these tabs. So in this case, I'm right clicking on sheet 1, and I'm going to click on move or copy. That's going to bring up a little dialog box, and here it's this sheet 1 that I'd like to copy. I'm going to click on this button here. It says create a copy. Click OK, and you'll see immediately you've got a copy. It names it the same and puts in brackets 2. Now I can change the order of these drawings. So simply by clicking and dragging on the tab. So I've just clicked and dragged it to the other side. And I'm going to rename it by right clicking and going rename. So in this case, this will be sheet 2 in capitals, details, like so. And so if I double click on this sheet or I double click on that sheet, at the moment they look very similar, but we'll go through the process of drawing or amending these. I'm going to take a copy of the cover sheet for our schedules sheet because it is only one viewport that's required on that schedule. So I'm going to right click, move or copy, click on the cover sheet, create a copy, click OK. I'm going to rename that cover sheet. I'm going to go, this will be sheet 3 dash schedules, enter, and then click and drag that tab to the end. So we have 4 sheets in total, starting with sheet 00. The next thing is to look at how drawings are placed and how to activate and deactivate viewports within the sheet environment to get our drawings to sit where we want them. So I'm going to go back to our sheet 1, and I'm going to activate one of these viewports. So the floor plan viewport simply by double clicking in that view. And you can see as I zoom out, it's almost like I'm viewing a model space within this paper space now. Now, if I move, this is our floor plan here. Let's say I move the floor plan and I'm like, okay, I'm pretty happy with where that's sitting. That's not actually sitting at any given scale. If you take a look in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got your scale of the viewport down here, and at the moment it's some decimal number. I can click on that, and you can see there's a whole raft of different scales that I can choose from there. And in this case, it's 1 to 50. So I click on that, and you'll see that the drawing changes. In fact, if I zoom out in that model, in that viewport, you'll see immediately the scale is broken, and it's gone back to a decimal number. I would have to click on that scale, go back to 1 to 50, and now it's locked at that. But I have to make sure that I pan across and set this up appropriately. Now, this is why your reference drawings are so critical here. So we've got our property boundary somewhere around here, and then down somewhere around here within this area here. So I'm very much just eyeballing at this point, because there is still information that we have to add to these drawings that may make them take up less or more space in the drawing set, particularly around the elevations, which I'll touch on shortly. So I'll go back to here, and I think I'm pretty happy with that, but there's a couple of other things I want to look at. So the first thing is I need to deactivate the viewport. If I try and go into another viewport, nothing can really happen. If I click in that viewport, it can activate it. The other way to get out of the viewport is simply by clicking on where you see the little model tab down here. Click on that and it goes back to paper. So now when I zoom in and out, I'm zooming in and out of the paper and not in the viewport. I'm going to do the same thing again, double click into this viewport, and I'm going to go 1 to 50. And I'm going to drag my section to be somewhere around here, something like that. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the other way I can deselect my viewport or my model view is to double click out in the middle of paper space. You can see now the tab has switched back to paper, and now I'm zooming in and out on the paper space. I'm going to do the same thing one more time here. So double click, zoom out. There's my elevations. I'm going to sort of zoom in and then go 1 to 100. Okay, so it's something like that. And now I need to eyeball the example sheets that are given, because there's some information here that we currently don't have. At the moment, our drawings essentially just end where both the elevations end. But there is critical information, which is dimensioning the reduced levels. So your natural ground level, finished floor level, and the ceiling level, plus some dimensions on the outside of that. So you have to account for the space that this information is going to take up. I don't know what that is, but we have to just assume that we need to leave some space. And that's the same on both sides. And likewise for these site boundaries. So these are setbacks that are vertical setbacks. We need to make sure we've got some space above our drawing to keep that in there. So I'll go back to AutoCAD again. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to drag this down a little bit. The other thing I want to make sure of is that I have relatively even space between these. So it's not wise to model within this viewport. What I would do here is I would click on this tab to go back to paper space. So now I'm out of that zone. Go back to the model environment and edit the model appropriately here. So a good tip and a good trick is you can go back to the sheet, double click in this viewport, take a line, draw a line, and just draw a random line on one side and a line on the other side. What that allows us to do, I'll double click out of there, is I can go back to my model space and I can see, sort of roughly speaking, how much room I have to play with. Now, I think that this is actually too close to the section. So I'm going to pick up, well, first I'm going to turn on the reference planes. I just want to make sure I've got them with me. I'm going to pick up all of these lines and I'm going to move them further over to the side, something like this. The next thing I'm going to do is try and find some way of evenly spacing these out. So it might be from wall to wall or something like that. So I might find some even number. So I might just do something like this, come across, and let's move, let's say 5 meters. So I'm going to take all of this, deselect that line, and I'm going to move over the wall so it matches up. And what I'm going to do as well is turn off the reference planes. We don't need those anymore. I'm going to move this line over to here, and then again move it 5 meters across. Select all of this drawing and move that to there. And one more time. Line from here. Okay, so now I've got even spacing between my drawings. It's not a fine art, but it does help. Just visually looks a little bit clearer. So okay, now I can see that my drawings are offset because I moved those drawings across in the model space. So I need to double click into the viewport, drag that across, and I might sit that down. It's somewhere around there. I'm pretty happy with that. Double click and I'm out of my model space. I'll go back to my cover sheet. Whoops, back to my model space, sorry. And I am going to change, I'm going to get rid of those two lines for now. So with that done, we're getting the beginnings of what will be our sheet setup. We do have more to add here. The other thing to look at is the length of the ground floor, making sure that that's even. These are very little things that aren't really going to change, you know, the material impact of your drawing, but it does change the legibility of your drawing. So I'm just going to double check. What is the distance of that ground line? Yes, some random number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hover over, draw across, and I might draw across, say, 6 meters. And I'm going to get rid of this line and that line and all of these as well. I'm going to take this line, I'm going to use my guides, just hover my mouse underneath the window so it snaps, and I'm going to hover my mouse over this bottom corner of the wall, and you see I'm getting like these guide snaps, and it snaps right into place, so it's smack bang in the middle at the right level. Now what I can do is, because that's the same line, I can just go midpoint to midpoint. I can do the same thing again as long as I find the midpoint in the roof, which is there. And one more time. There. Hit escape a couple times, and now I know that all my ground lines are the same. There's so many different ways you can do it, and again, it's just about making sure the drawing reads nice and clean. The other thing to look at is the title block itself. So what you're looking at here is you've got a number of different types of blocks and text and writing and whatnot, and some of it's not nearly as complex as you might think. So the title block itself, you can edit. So it's one big block, the whole thing, if I select it, the whole title block selects, and there's information in this title block which is dynamic. So in this instance, everything is correct in the title block, but I will change it just for the sake of showing you. But all you need to do is double click on a piece of information, and you'll see here you get this window that appears that allows you to dynamically update the information within that title block. So probably a good idea. Let's change this date. You can see how old the title block is. We can go 2024, and let's say it's April. Click OK, and you can see the title block updates straight away. Student name is not currently inputted, so I'll double click on student name. And in here, I'll put my name. Okay. But then there's other piece of information which is actually just text, writing, and line work. So for instance, the titles of each drawing are exactly that. So what you're looking at here, as you're probably working out or finding out in your working drawings class, what you have here is drawing 1 on sheet 1, which is called the south elevation at a scale of 1 to 100. So all of these are just text, and they're just text at certain sizes. I'm not too interested in playing around with that right now, but just so you understand what they are. And then a circle and a line, nothing that smart. And then that just continues on. Drawing 2 on sheet 1, drawing 3 on sheet 1, all the way down to drawing 6 on sheet 1, which is section A at a scale of 1 to 50. Same with the information down here in the title block regarding the windows. So that's telling us that window 1 is a 900 by 1200 slider, and same with window 2. The last thing I'm going to look at is the line type scales. So this is important to not edit the scale of the drawing, but we're going to click on certain lines and change how the dashes appear. So take a quick look at the reference drawing, and you can see that these dash lines are quite close together, while these dash lines are much further apart. And how they're controlled is through a tool called the line type scale. So back in here, I'm going to double click in this viewport, but I'm not going to zoom in or out. Remember, as soon as I do, I'm going to break the scale. So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to click on this line. I'm going to click on this line. And under the line type scale, so I'm going to go to my properties window. And I can see here the line type scale is 1.5. If I change that to 1, you'll see the dashes become closer together. Hit escape. I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to do the opposite. Let's change this line type scale to say 3, and the lines become further apart. Now, I reckon let's go 4. That's better. But I'm not happy with the fact that the line is actually not the line that I want. It should be a dash and a dot. So in order to change that, that's good that that's come up here. I'm going to go to my layer properties manager. We're going to go to the A boundary layer. And I'm going to come across to here where it says line style. At the moment it just says dashed. So click on dashed, and we're actually going to go to this top one that's called ISO 04, which is like a line, a dot, a line, a dot. I'm going to click OK, and you'll see now that that line is updated to a dash dot, dash dot. I might click on that line, and I might make that a bit smaller again. Let's go back to 3. There we go. I'm happy with that. Now to get out of here, I'm going to click on where the button says model, and now I'm out of model space, out of the viewport, and I'm back on my paper. And so that's the basis, that's the beginnings of how we align drawings to viewports in Paperspace. The last thing I'll show you is how to adjust these. So in this instance here, we have 3 viewports that we need to create for our details. We haven't got our details yet, but we can start by making those viewports or adjusting these viewports. So as we said here, we have 1, 2, and 3 viewports. 1 is an elongated rectangle in portrait, and the other 2 are 2 rectangles in landscape. Now, I don't care too much about exactly what these look like, but I'll show you how to edit them nonetheless. So on that page, on our details page, don't forget that the title block has to be updated accordingly to match the information on the example. What I am going to do is I'm going to delete some of this text because we only need 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this title block, and I'm going to click on one of these grips and just move my hand down the screen. I'm going to do the same for this one. I'm going to move this back, and I'm going to use this as a guide to somewhere around there, and I might drag that further down. Then finally, I'm going to drag this one back a little bit, click on this one, drag it back a little bit, and then this one here, I'm going to click and drag up to here. So now I have 3 distinct windows. I can move these titles just like moving any other object in AutoCAD. Nothing too smart there, pretty easy done. Same with this one down here, I might move that to there. And then if I need to change the text, let's zoom in. If I need to change the text, I can just double click on that text, it will highlight it. And in this case, we might just say wall, floor, detail. Now, I don't think that's what it's called, but nonetheless, I'm just showing you how you do change that. The other thing to consider is that the drawing numbers will be different. So we're currently on drawing, this will become drawing number 2. So we need to change the sheet name, which again, you can do that in your own time. I'm just giving you an example. So sheet 2, and I'm going to change this. This will be drawing 3. On sheet 2. Like so. And that's how you edit your titles, update your title block, edit your viewports, and how you scale your drawings within the viewports. So when we go to the details, you can go, once we create the details, you can then apply them appropriately, keeping in mind the scales, and all the information you need is on the example sheet. But just remember that those viewports that you're seeing that I've drawn in red here are invisible when you print the sheets, but they're visible in the sheets within AutoCAD. Text and dimensioning can be found in two locations. You can find it under the Home tab in the ribbon, and you'll see under Annotation you'll have Text and Dimension. The tool that I prefer to use, to be honest, is under the Annotate tab itself. The Annotate tab is basically the same, but in its full expression, so you've got a lot more optionality here and a little bit better control, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time in this segment. So we want to make sure the text and dimensions are on the correct layer as well, because we want to be able to pull off those dimensions and text should we need to at any given point in time. So having them on the same layer as walls or doors is not really going to do us much good. So you can see in the template file, you've got AN to hatch, AN dimensions, AN text. AN is annotation. So let's start with AN text. I'm going to double click onto that and make sure that I'm on that layer. I'm then going to go up to here where it says multi-line text, and you'll see next to that there's a thing here, a drop-down box that has 3.5 millimeters at 1 to 50, and a whole bunch of, when you click on that drop-down box, a whole lot of other dimensions and sizes here. This is a little bit complex to get your head around, and it's one thing that was definitely a challenge for me when I first started in CAD. But because what you're looking at in this model space is at 1:1, you have to scale your text appropriately, so when it actually prints at a scale, the text ends up being the size that it is required to be. And therefore, to have 2 millimeter text on a printed sheet of paper, you need multiple versions, because 2 mil at 1 to 100 would be different at 1 to 10 or 1 to 50. It's a little bit of a confusing concept to get your head around, and thankfully, later softwares we learn, like BIM and Revit softwares, they do this calculation for us automatically. However, most of the texts and styles that we're going to need to utilize in this assignment are already in the template file given to you to save that hassle. So what we're going to start with is I'm going to go scroll down and I'm going to find 3.5 millimeters at 1 to 50 and click on that. And I'll know it's selected because it's there in the drop down box at the top. I'm going to click on multi-line text. I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to click once, click twice. And now I'm just going to type in proposed, enter, workshop. This works like any other real text editor in that I can change its spacing, or I'll highlight it all, change the spacing setup, the paragraph setup, etc. Once I'm done, I'll just click out, and then in order to move it, you'll see that text works like any other object. I can then click on the grip, move this around. I can move it precisely if I want using the move tool. I can rotate it, you can mirror it. Anything that you normally do with geometry, you can do here. And really this is a game of going back and forth between the example and the one that we're working on. So my suggestion is that you get like a red pen, you print these out, and you get a red pen, you essentially scribble them out. So I'll go something like this, a thick pen. All right, so we're done with that. Next up is these little things here. So we have up and then DP. DP means down pipe, and you can see there's a thick line, a thick circular line there and a thick circular line there. So let's do that. I'm going to go back to here and I'm going to change my text style, and I'm going to find 2 millimeters at 1 to 50 if we've got it, or 2.5, either or will be fine. 2 millimeters at 1 to 50, perfect. I'll click on that. I'm going to go for another one, small box, DP, dot, enter. Now I can rotate this like I do any other text. Just click once and type in 45 degrees. I'm going to click on this text and move it around here somewhere. And I'm going to copy that to around here somewhere. And I can draw those circles at a later stage. The next thing I need is another text line to go somewhere around here. Up for our stairs. And I can change the length of this text box simply by clicking on this arrow here and dragging the column width back. So it looks something like that. So far, so good. Next is, let's go back to our reference drawings. So that's done. That's done. Next up will be That's done. Next up will be the window symbols and the section symbols. So this goes hand in hand with my next component, or my next point is around symbols in the drawing. So such as these symbols here, or these symbols here, these callouts, or the section marker or the window markers. To be honest, there are two different ways you can do it in AutoCAD. One is through a dynamic block, which means that essentially you can type in different information into that object every single time. Which is the way that the title block is done. The same way you can just double click on a piece of text and it will update dynamically. Well, the other option is to do it just straight up manually, and that's the mode that we're going to do here, just so you can go through the motions of how to create these objects and shapes. So if we take, for instance, the window marker, that's relatively easy. So I'm going to make sure I'm still on this layer, but I'm going to draw a circle, and the circle will be something like, say this, and we'll say maybe 150 mil in diameter. I'm going to take 2 lines of text. One will be a W, and I'm going to make sure it's centered. Save the text, yes I do. And I'll go Control C, Control V, and I'll go 01. Now I'm just going to drag this back to here. And the W up here, and then finish off with a line from one quadrant to the next, and that's my window marker. And then I can just copy this across, like so, and I'll just double check, that's window 2. Okay, something like that. Now the section marker works much the same. So we could even take this as a basis of our section marker. I'm going to copy the whole thing and just come over here quickly. And here I'm going to go, this is, double click, A, and this is going to be dashed, like so. Now the reason why it's dashed, here you can see A with a dash. The reason why it's dashed is because it's on the same sheet. So if this section here is this section here, because this is on the same sheet, you don't need to show the sheet number. You can just have it as dash. You could have it as A-01, or you might have it as, in some instances, in fact, this might need to actually be 0601. So then this reference is exactly the same as this reference. There are a multitude of different ways, and again, different offices will work different ways too, but this is not a drafting class or a working drawings class. This is just this is our DigiApps class. So we'll just copy verbatim what's shown here. So with that in mind, we've got this working now. I'm going to go with a line, and let's go out. We'll come out here, say 100 mil. And we're going to come down a 45-degree angle. I'm going to hover over the quadrant of the circle and do something like that. Hit escape, take this and mirror it, like so, and there's our section marker. We still need to fill that in with a hatch. Okay, so which we can do shortly. And we need a line that's going from here over something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hatch this area in. So hatching is essentially like a pattern or a fill, and I'll go through hatches in a little bit more detail shortly, but just for this instance we're just going to do a solid black hatch. Now one tip to make for you guys, please make sure that you save your file before you start hatching. Hatching does have a tendency sometimes to crash the file if the area is quite complex, so it's always good practice just to save your file before in case it does glitch and crash. So I'm going to type in hatch into my keyboard, hit enter, and you'll notice that the ribbon changes. So the ribbon, I now have hatch creation as a tab, and the ribbon is now changed. I'm just going to choose, in here I can choose all these different type of hatch types, but we're just going to stick with solid for now. The transparency I'm going to turn down to 0. Hit enter, and then I'm just going to click inside of the triangle. That's done. Hit escape. Whoops. Hit escape, and we're now done. And there's our section marker. Now these are all individual objects, so I'm going to click on this and move this over. to around here, and I'm not happy with how that's currently sitting. So I'm going to make sure I have this line on the dash line, like so. That looks pretty good. Now, I can essentially copy this whole thing across to the other side. Go from line to line. And then all I need to do is take this line and mirror it from the arrow down, and this time I'll erase the source object. And then we've got our section marker going through our floor plan. Not too bad. So if we want to see how this is appearing on our sheet, we can just go back to our sheets here, and you'll see there's our text, our arrowheads, our downpipes, and our text so far. I'm going to come back to the model. And I think in the example, now normally what happens is basically all of your annotations are the same size except for your room names, which are a larger annotation. In the example, it does appear like the text is bigger for the annotations than the rest of the annotations. So I'm happy either way, because really consistency is more important. Your annotation should be consistent. So 2 mil everywhere I'm happy with. Next thing is dimensioning. So let's go through the process of dimensioning up a floor plan, and the process is exactly the same no matter what you're dimensioning. So first things first, I'm going to go to my properties, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on AN dimensions. Double click on that, and there we are. So I'll make sure that I'm on that later by clicking on home and seeing that under my layers I'm on AN dash dimensions. I'm going to go back to annotate, and much the same way as with text, you have different types of dimension types depending on the scale of your drawing. In this case, we've got a 1 to 50 drawing, so I'm going to use the arc-50 dimension marker. Okay, so in order to dimension, I can click on the dimension tool here and simply click on one point and another point, and then drag my mouse back, and you'll see that I get that dimension appearing, and I can just place that wherever I like. I can then hit spacebar again, or I can continue dimensioning provided I didn't hit exit or escape. So for instance, I could do the door opening from opening to opening, like so. Now that's not a bad way of doing it, but we can do other dimensions such as continuous dimensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this one here, and let's review the dimensions that are in the file. Okay, so what you have, and every office has a different way of doing this, but these drawings seem like they've got dimension lines that are as follows: changes to the dimensions outside the building, changes to the dimensions of inside the building or the structure, and then the final line is the overall dimension of the outside wall to the outside wall. So if we use that premise, we can use that same rule. I can go back to CAD, pick up the dimension tool, but this time click on continue dimension, and we're going to go dimension, we're going to go this location to that location, and I'm going to come back to here, and then I can just drop that somewhere, and then I can click on continue, and I can pick up the opening of the door to the opening of the window, to the end of the opening of the window, to the end of the wall, and then when I'm done, hit escape, and that's finished that dimension. Now you'll notice that this dimension, the 300, is sat underneath the dimension line, not above, and that's because CAD has sort of got like a system in there where it's like, well, I can't really squish that in there, so it's going to sit below. But you can change that simply by clicking on that dimension, and there's a little blue grip on the number, just clicking and moving that back up to be in alignment with the other dimensions, and then hitting escape. So if I do that again, I'm going to go dimension, and this time I'm going to do changes inside the building. So I'm going to go from this wall here, hover my mouse over that corner and move my hand down so I capture the stud thickness. So it's going to look something like that. I'm then going to continue this dimension by clicking on continue. I'm going to go from the inside wall to the inside wall, and then the wall thickness again, and then hit escape a couple of times. Now again, with this 90 mil, I'm going to just shift these around so it looks a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to place it like so. Hit escape a couple of times, that dimension's done. And now one final dimension, I'm going to go just from end to end using one dimension tool, drag that back, and there's our rough dimensions for the building. Now, where they sit, how far away from the building they sit, the distance in between them, it's really to your eye. So you can see I probably left too much, not enough space between the wall and the dimensions, the lines, and I can just simply pick them all up. They act like any other object, and I can just move them out if I want. You will notice that there's these tiny little dots on the screen. Those tiny little dots that you're seeing are the references of where I took the dimensions from. And annoyingly, you have to sort of move them back if you were to do that. This is why sometimes you can just dimension them. Redimensioning them can be quicker. Or my tip for you is dimension further back than you actually want, because it's generally easier to move a dimension closer and you won't see those dots. But if I move them further out, you can see those dots appearing on the left-hand side. So generally, I dimension further away, move the dimensions inboard rather than doing the opposite. Otherwise, you'll be left with these annoying white specks everywhere that you've got to go moving back into place. So with that, I'm going to leave the rest of those dimensions and the rest of that annotation for you. The last thing I will do on the floor plan is I'm going to go back to my home screen, my home tab. I'm going to click on APEN 35. Whoops. APEN 35, change myself to that layer. I'm going to go circle and just type in 50 for a downpipe. And do the same thing on the other side. You want to reference the drawing, so I'm just doing this by memory. I think there's something like that. Now if we go back to our sheet 1, we can see now that this sheet is really starting to come together. Notice as well that the dimensions are now outside of the screen. So this is a good example of how you've got to continue to go back and forward between your viewports or between your model space and your paper space to make sure everything's aligned in your drawings nice and neatly. I can always double click in this viewport, not changing the scale, but just holding my middle mouse button down and panning. I can move the drawing up closer to that line, and you can see that I'm starting to get the dimensions back, but I still haven't got all of them. I'm going to double click outside of the viewport to deactivate the viewport and model space. I'll go back to my model, and I'm probably just going to select these dimensions and just move them slightly further in. I might move them, say like 100 mil or 150 mil back up. Go back to my sheets, and you can see now that my dimensions are falling within that view there, and that looks pretty good. The same thing is done for your sections as well. So same sort of text, keeping in mind that the text is still at a 1 to 50. So you want to make sure that you're using text sizes that are at 1 to 50, dimension styles are at 1 to 50. But one thing I will show you again is that it's not that hard to do some of that other information, such as the dash lines and the level markers. So we've got dash lines across here, these level markers and the text, and these callouts here with the bubbles with the text and the dash lines. That's quite easy to do. I'm going to quickly do this, but I'll let you go through and do them much more accurately than I. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to click on A-13. I'm going to go to my line tool, and I'm going to make sure I'm at my ceiling level, and I'm going to click and come out to around about where the ground line ends. Click, and I'm going to highlight that and just make sure I drag it to the other side, also to where the ground line ends. And I can just take that, offset 2.4 meters, and I know that's going to be in my finished ground level. I don't care that the dash lines aren't showing correctly yet, because I'm going to adjust that in my paper space. I will just verify that all of the text ends in line with the ground line and the hatching. So from there, I'm going to find some text. I'm going to go back to annotate, 2 mil at 1 to 50. Make sure I'm on the right layer, because I'm not currently on the right layer. So I'm going to go AN-text, dimension, and I can't remember exactly what that was, so I'm just going to type in a random number. That's definitely not right, so just double check that. All right, I'll make sure that that text is in alignment, something like that. And then a polyline, and just drawing a triangle. And there's nothing that intelligent about it. It's just drawing a triangle by eye. So I'll go 200, down at 45 using my snaps, and back up, something like that. That's one of my RLs. I can copy this down using this as my base point, so I know that I'm copying it from the same location every time, and it's the same distance away from the corresponding line, something like that. Then it would be a case of dimensioning those, going from point to point. Okay, but keeping in mind, obviously I've not done that very accurately. No, I definitely have not. But keeping in mind that everything has to be on the correct layer. So I go back to my sections and details, and you can see that's starting to appear there. It's not too bad. I can double click, move that across a bit. I'm quite happy with that now, something like that. Double click to deactivate the view. And then it's a case of adding in text. Now the next thing is around those selection, or those boxes with the callouts. So let's do the callout that's around up here, around the roof. So what I'm going to do is, as a starter, I'm going to copy one of these window markers because I can just do that. I'm going to drag this over to here somewhere, just like so. And I'm going to go back to my home tab. I'm still on AN text. I'm going to take a rectangle. I'm going to click on this tool here and just draw a rectangle like so. And if I don't like it, I can just sort of stretch and drag it as I need to. Okay, I need to eyeball what that looked like here. Not too bad. I think it actually comes out a bit further. There's no real accuracy to this, because you're generally just saying that, you know, somewhere within this area, the call out has been made to another detail. I'll move this out to around about here. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is fillet these lines. So I'm going to select this and go fillet, and I might do a radius of, say, 200, and I'll go corner and corner. Oh, let's try that again. Fillet, radius 200, corner, not too much. Fillet again. R for radius, let's do a fillet of 100. Corner and corner. Like so. And then just a line from this corner on a 45-degree angle to around about there. And then I'm going to move this so it's like so. I'll select all of these, and I'll go from here up to around about there, just as an example. Now the last thing I need to do is select these lines, and I'm going to change their line not by the layer, but by these actual lines. So we can edit the types of lines that are assigned to different objects. We don't always have to do it by the layer. We can do it on a specific basis, though that's probably something that you want to avoid doing all the time. So in this case, because this is all a part of the text, that's why this is all on the text layer. But what I'm going to do is I've got my layers here, and under the home tab, I've got my properties. So I've got the color is by the layer, so the color is white as it's showing. The thickness is by the layer, which is a very thin line. So maybe let's change that thickness to, say, 0.25. And then let's change the style to a dash line, like so. I'll hit escape a couple times, and we've got something that looks like this. So let's go back into our paper space and edit accordingly. Okay, so we've got something that looks like this. I'm going to zoom into the area and then double click to activate that viewport. I'm going to click on these two lines, and under the line type scale, I'm going to change this to, say, 0.5 and then enter. And you can see those dashed lines are closer together, but I definitely don't like the line thickness. So I'm going to change this back to by layer. Something like that. Hit escape a couple times, and we're done. Double click out, and that's how you draw callouts. Again, pay very close attention to how it's been done in the original, and make sure that you copy these shapes, these numbers, the numbers on them, the line weights, the size, the width, like how much of it of the scope it's covering, etc. All right. Next thing, and the final thing to look at here, is hatching. So hatching is not just the blank solid black fills that we were looking at before, but it's anywhere where there's a pattern. So in your drafting classes, in your working drawings classes, you'll learn about what all these different patterns are. In this case, that's earth, that's concrete, and that's backfill. The same thing applies to the hatching given to the weatherboard pattern as well, and the tin roof and the metal roof sheeting. So I'm going to go back into CAD, and I'm going to go back to our model, and a bit of a technique and a bit of a trick for you to use. So first things first, I'm going to go to my properties manager. I'm going to change my layer to AN hatch, double click to activate that. And I'm going to go a polyline, and I'm going to go from here down to say 1200 across the whole way, hover my mouse over this corner so I lock into it and come back up. I did not lock into that very well, so let's do that again. Lock into that, come up, hit escape, and we're done. I'm now going to fill at the edge of those corners. You don't have to do this, but just showing you that you can do this. Okay, and now we can start hatching. So again, you want to make sure that you don't have text or anything else interacting with your hatching. Sometimes it's really good just to make sure your model is blank as possible. I'm going to hit save and type in hatch again. And this time I'm going to click on the drop down box, and we're going to go down, scroll down until I find earth. So there's earth there. I'm going to click on that. And you'll notice that when I hover over this, it looks really weird. It's really dense. It doesn't look right. Now, tip for you, just click and get the hatch done. Hit escape, okay? And then click on the hatch after you're done. If you try and do this before you hatch, sometimes you can end up, again, corrupting the file, or it slows down CAD drastically. Just a tip that works for me is I tend to just hatch the area, even if it's the wrong hatch. Then once it's done, hit escape, and we can change the hatch after the fact. So you can see it's followed the boundary of that box we made. If you didn't have that box underneath of it, it will try and hatch the whole world, essentially, the entire model space, and that will definitely crash your file. So very important that you don't click in an area that isn't a closed bounding box of some sort. So what I'm going to do now is we still have the hatch pattern. I've clicked on this hatch, I've selected it. It is the earth hatch, but there's a couple of things we need to change. One is the angle. I'm going to change this to 45 degrees. Whoop, and maybe I'll change it to 90. No. Ah, sorry, I'm changing the size. That's my bad. I'm going to change the size to say a bit bigger than that, maybe 30. Yeah, 30 looks all right. Maybe 25. Yep, and I'll change the angle to 45 degrees. And then also the hatch transparency, I might change that to say like 20% transparent, just so it's not like solid black lines. And then you can see what we've got here. I'm going to delete this outside line and then go back to our sheets, and you'll see there's that hatch pattern there. And because I've made it 20% transparent, when I zoom right in, notice the difference between this line that's fully black and this one's like a dark gray. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you do print it, it will just appear much more pleasing to the eye. All right, let's keep going with that. So let's go back and go hatch again. And I'm going to choose my concrete hatch. So I'm going to find concrete. AR concrete, architectural concrete. And I'm just going to go 1, 2, and 3 for the pads. Hit escape a couple times, and again, I'm going to click on that hatch. It's got currently a transparency of 0, so I'm going to make that 20%. And the size, this time the size is 1, I'm going to make it 0.5. So I'll make it a bit more dense, so you get more of that hatch pattern. And I'll go back to my elevations and sections, and you'll see there's that hatch there. In fact, I probably made that a bit too small, so let's go back to our model space, and I'm going to change that accordingly. I'll go back to here, click on the hatch, and I'll change this to say 0.75. Finally, we'll do the backfill. So I'll go hatch again, and I'm going to find a diagonal line. something that looks like this. So it's two diagonal lines close together. And I'm just going to go 1. You can see I'm being quite patient. 2. And there we go. Hit escape a couple times to get out of the hatch. Click on that hatch environment and notice that they all select together because they were all done at the same time within that one hatch command, whether the others are separate hatches because they were done at different instances. So I'll click on this hatch. Again, I want to change the transparency to 20 and the angle is fine, and the size I want to increase to say 3, maybe even 5. That looks good. And I'll go back to my sheets. And you can see how that's appeared. That looks much nicer now. And you can see how hatching really gives that sort of depth and texture to your drawings. Now applying this hatch to the elevations, and this is why it's important to start hatching this before you have too much information. Or if you do have a whole lot of lines and text going through your drawing, I'll show you what I mean. So let's say, for instance, I'm just going to copy this. This is by no means correct. And I'm just going to copy this to be somewhere around here, okay? Because you'll note that in the example set, you do have these dashed lines that are going through your drawing. You have to remember that CAD wants to break up the gaps between CAD still sees this as a solid line. So it thinks that this tiny area here is one rectangle and that's one rectangle. Much the same as it thinks that this is one rectangle down here and this is another rectangle here. And that can be really confusing when you're hatching and you're trying to get the scale right. So the best thing to do is you remove these lines or you hide them. Again, layer control is so important. Then you hatch them, then you turn back on your layers. Really good a really good or smart technique that unfortunately I did not learn, and I crashed many CAD files, especially on more complex facades. So again, let's go hatch, and you'll notice that when I go to hatch, see how it's picking up this area as one, this area is one, and that area is another, even though that's a dashed line that's breaking up. So that's why I would go and make sure that I'm on the right layer, okay, or I'd go to my layer control and I would turn off, in this case, A-13. And you'll see those lines turn off. And now when I go to hatch, irregardless what the hatch pattern is, it's seeing this whole facade as one hatch, which is a much smarter way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this text because you'll be doing it much more accurate than I. I'm going to go hatch, and in this case I'm just going to choose this this diagonal line. These lines are evenly spaced apart. I'm just going to click once, and actually no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to click each time. And the reason why I'm doing this, you'll see shortly. Actually, in fact, I'm going to leave one of them out. All right, so what I'll do now is I'll click on this, and I'll clean this up. So first things first, size. I'll change that to say 50, even 60, yep, 60. I'll change the angle, 45 degrees. Maybe I have to change it to say 135. There we go, to flatten them out so they look like weatherboards. I'll change the transparency here to 50, so we don't want them to be very strong. And there we've got our weatherboards. That looks really good. And even if I go back to my drawings here, you can see how that's coming up. And again, because you're using that lighter color, it just is not so overbearing. You can clearly see the shape of your building, and then the pattern is just sort of complementary. Okay, but notice that we didn't hatch that last one. So as we were editing them, we were editing all of these at the same time. The problem is that because now I haven't done this one, I can't just add a hatch. I have to go and do that same command again, bring it up, go to here, hit escape, click on it, and then do that same editing all over again. It's probably not the best way to do it. Now, there are other techniques you can use. You can click on the hatch and you can say like pick points, you can add to it, you can remove parts of the hatch. I tend not to do that just because, again, it crashes the file. Keep that in mind, it can just be a bit of a pain. Last thing is this roof hatching. So I'm going to go hatch again, and this is just for your tin roof. I'm going to pick the same hatch. I'm going to click once there and once in the back elevation. Hit escape a couple times. Click on that hatch and let's edit this. So first things first is size. I might make that 15. Change the angle to 45 so it's vertical. change the transparency to 15. Oh, sorry, 50. And so we've got something that looks like that, and that's our tin roof. In fact, it's probably bigger than that, so I'll go 20. Hit escape, and you can only see them on the front and back elevation. When I go back to the sheet, you can see there's our roof hatching. With a fair amount of modeling now complete, I think it's probably important to take stock and make sure that our models are kept clean and that everything's in the right layer. It's a really simple technique and concept to understand, but is one that is a little bit time consuming and is seldom done, and definitely not enough. So a really simple way that you audit your file is to essentially just zoom out. I've got everything open on my screen currently, or everything that everything modeled that I've done. I'm just going to open up the properties window and just turn off all the layers. Select all the layers, turn them all off, turn off the current layer, okay, like so. And then it's a case of, there's two ways you can go about this. You can turn them back on one at a time. So for instance, the A boundary 50 layer, I should just see that here. If I want to see pen 09, I can see that I've got some stairs here. I've got some other objects here, including the X's of all my studs. I've got some other stairs down here, the side of the stairs, some gutter lines and whatnot. Or the other way to do this is you can go on the reverse, and sometimes the reverse is also a little bit easier, where you turn everything on and you start turning things off one by one. So a good example, we'll start with guides. So I'll turn off the reference planes, and I'll make sure that I don't have any floating reference planes still in the drawing. Clearly I don't, so that's good. The next one is around, say, particularly your dimension and text. So I'm just going to double click on layer 0. The reason why I'm doing that is so I can continue to turn off every other layer, knowing that nothing in this model is on layer 0. So I'm going to go down to my, say, dimensions. I'm going to turn off my dimensions, and I hope that the only thing that's missing are my dimensions from the floor plan or any dimensions that I had anywhere else in the project. But I need to double check that no text is turning off as well. So I'll turn it back on, and yeah, looks like that nothing else is turning on other than just those dimensions, which is correct. Next is the text. I'm going to turn off the text, and exactly as name implies, we want to make sure that there's no text that's remaining. If I'm still seeing text, it's on the wrong layer. Now, if something is on the wrong layer, as I alluded to in earlier classes, it's quite simple to simply just click on an object, go to the drop-down layer layer window, and then just associate with the right layer. So if this was text, I would just click on the text window, on the text button, and it would go. AutoCAD would give me a warning saying that the object that I've moved it to is turned off or is frozen. So it gives me a warning going, just so you realize that you're not seeing that object anymore. Then you just say close. Of course, that was not the right thing to do. That's going to stay on -13. But that's another example. Let's go to A-13 and turn that off. And accurately, all of my dash lines are now gone, which is exactly what I want. The last thing I'm going to do is that now that we have our drawings set up nice and cleanly on these sheets, particularly on the first set of drawings, I'm going to go back to here, and I'm just going to remove these floor plans. These were just tools and guides that served a purpose at a point in time, but now no longer helps, and it's just cluttering up the drawings, so I can remove them. This is really simple. These are really simple workflows, but this is something that I will definitely be opening up your models and grading you guys on, because it's a concept that is so simple that can very easily get away from you if you forget a couple of lines or a couple of objects on the wrong layer. It can get away from you. I mean, case in point, I didn't have the dash lines and the guidelines turned on. I deleted those guide floor plans, and those other objects were a part of that, and I didn't even realize because those layers were not turned on at the time. So it's easy to think for such a small project that, you probably think to yourself, what's the point? But if we were working on, a school or a hospital, or one of your projects where, you wanted to make sure that all your furniture's on a certain layer and all your walls are on a certain layer because you need to Photoshop it or you need to model it in another software over the top of it, you really want to make sure that everything's on the correct layer. And that really just starts by good habits and good practice for the most from the most basic standpoint, and that's why you're graded on that workflow.